Hello, good morning. I am here today to give instructions about how to do the 3D print activity for STEAM Camp. So hopefully these instructions help out. If not, I'm happy to answer any questions about it. I have my trusty assistant with me today, so Blaine, you can come in here. This is my son Blaine, and he's in third grade. And this activity we have decided is for third, fourth, and fifth graders, and possibly sixth graders if they're in the elementary school. And so hopefully he'll be a good model for us. He doesn't know anything about this activity other than it's a 3D print activity. And so hopefully he'll give us a good representation of what a third, fourth, or fifth grader might experience while doing this activity. So to start this activity, it would be helpful if we had a 3D printer there, but maybe we can just have conversations about 3D printing with kids before this activity begins. So we happen to have our 3D printer going back here. And Blaine, tell me what you know about 3D printers. Tell me what you know about a 3D printer.
Well, in a 3D printer, it uses code to know how to 3D print something. And so it's 3D printing a mistletoe right now. And so it's using code to tell it how to print the mistletoe cookie cutter.
And how does it actually create the cookie cutter? Like, what is it doing to create it?
Well, it has like trimmer line, like on a weed eater, and it goes down into here and melts it, and then it comes out here and creates the thing that you want to make.
Cool. So that's essentially how a 3D printer works. Is it takes a thin string of plastic and it melts it, and then it puts that melted plastic in a specific place. And the way that it knows where to put that melted plastic is based on the code that's inputted into the program. And so that's what we're going to be doing today. Is we're going to be 3D printing. Now, we're not going to be melting plastic, but we're going to be taking plastic and putting it wherever our code tells us to put the plastic, and then putting those pieces of plastic together in order to create our 3D object. So, we will need students creating two different 3D objects, because in one group they'll be creating a 3D object, and so I have what looks like maybe a robot here, or perhaps if we're doing a holiday theme, this could perhaps be Santa Claus, right? And so, so one group, if we take half of the students who are in the 3D print activity, and we put them over to create this robot, and then the other half will be creating something different. They'll be creating this dog, or if we're doing a holiday theme, perhaps this is a reindeer.
Rudolph.
And so half the group will be creating this, or writing code to create this, and half of the students will be writing code to create this. Both of these objects use exactly 20 cubes. And so what we'll have to do is have one of these made that they can look at and model. So we'll have to have one of each of these made so they can look at and model. And then kids will each need at least 20 cubes of their own, so as they're writing their code, they're kind of putting together using their own cubes to make sure that theirs looks like this as they're coding. Okay, if that makes sense? So what will happen is kids will have a model, and the model will be on grid paper. So 3D printers essentially work with a three-dimensional grid. And we have a grid made right here, and this grid will be made. The blocks that we're going to be using for this activity are much smaller than these blocks, but so our grid will be smaller. But what we want is that we want our grid to match the same size as our blocks. Cool. So that way, students will be trying to code or trying to give instructions on where to put the blocks on the grid paper. So that means that we need to have a model sitting on grid paper, and the students are going to try and code this 3D print. So that means they need to have they need to be able to write some instructions, and I think it's best if we don't give them any help as to what kind of instructions they write. how do you tell the machine to put a drop of plastic on this particular grid, and this particular spot? Do we need to create a B, C, D across the top and a 1, 2, 3, 4 across the side? I don't know. I think kids will have to come up with that on their own, or maybe they'll just say over 3, up 4, and put it there. I think that either way is correct, and I think that we should let them experiment and try and code however they want. This activity, I think, will be difficult for some, and that's kind of why I like it. So, Blaine, tell me, pretend that I'm a robot and I have a drop of plastic here. Pretend I'm a 3D printer. We want to recreate this. So in a little bit, I'm going to have you write it. But for now, just give me the instructions on how I would create that.
Place a block in 6 down and 4 over.
Okay, so
Starting from the corner.
first of all, I don't have a block. So my first instruction would be,
Pick up a block.
okay, so maybe we need to start there. Pick up block. Good? Now where?
In 6 down and 4 over.
Okay, so I'm going to go 6 down, 1, 2,
Starting
3,
from
4.
the top left corner.
Oh, so we also need instructions about where to start, right? Because some people might start in the top left-hand corner, some people might start in the top right-hand corner, some people might start in the bottom left-hand corner, on the bottom right-hand corner. So when we're writing our code, we need to think about specific instructions like pick up block, and we need to think about specific instructions about where to start. And if we know where to start and we have specific instructions, I can go down 6, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I can go over 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I can, then one instruction,
Drop block.
drop block. So that's one line of code. We dropped one piece of plastic onto our 3D print. What would be the next instruction that you would give me?
Pick up block.
Pick up block.
And then start on where the other block was. Where the last block was.
Okay, well, I'm going to need instructions on how to get there because I've already forgotten.
Go down 6.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Go over 6.
Over.
Right.
Oh, so we also
Go
need to talk
right
about go
6.
right? So right 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Drop block.
Drop block. 2 lines of code done. 2 pieces of plastic dropped. So that's the general gist. I'm going to go ahead and let Blaine write out the code for the rest of this, and then I'm going to 3D print and do whatever his code says. So I'm just going to kind of let him do his thing, and then we'll get back together in just a little bit once he has his code written out. Thanks.
Okay.
Okay. All right, excellent. So, Blaine just wrote 22 lines of code,
22.
and this is what his code looks like. And one of the important things that I kind of had to help him with was this first line, that every time they're going to start in the top left corner. So this first line of code tells the 3D printer that each instruction starts from the top left-hand corner. I kind of had to help Blaine think about that or where to put this code. And so that's what he started with. Then he said, pick up block. So his code for that was pick up. And then he said down 6, right 4, and then his code was drop for drop block. So what he eventually decided is that he didn't need to write down and right every time. he shortened his code to draw a down arrow and a right arrow instead. We actually talked and thought about, is there a shortened code that you can use for pickup so you don't have to write pickup every time? And he kind of thought about an up arrow, but then we thought maybe that would get confusing in the code and they would think that you'd have to go up on the grid. And so we decided not to do that. And he never developed a shorthand way to write pickup. Same thing with drop. He didn't come up with a shorthand way to write drop. I think that we can help our kids in this activity come up with maybe P for pick up and D for drop, so that they're not spending the entire time just writing. And that's kind of the same thing coders do when they program things, is they use shorthand so that they're not spending their whole time typing. So we can maybe help kids with that. Parts where it got tricky for him and he really had to do some thinking is this part right here. He said, I'm going to go down 6, I'm going to go over 5, but he said if I write drop, then they're going to put the piece right down here instead of right here. And so that part was tricky for him and he had to do some thinking about that. So he decided to write, I don't know if you can read it right here, down 6, over 5, and then he says drop 3 high off paper. So that was him saying, you're going to drop it, but you're not going to drop it all the way to the paper. You're going to drop it 1, 2, 3 high. He also had some difficulty with the arms. And so here's kind of the same thing with the arms. And I don't know if you can tell in the video where he really had to think and go, wait a minute, how am I going to get the arms to move? And how am I going to tell them where to put the arms? He had to do some really tough thinking about how to make that happen. And I had to help give him a little bit of guidance or give him some things to think about to help him decide how he was going to code that to his 3D printer. So now in the activity, what we would do is Blaine has his code, and he would be in a group of 2 or 3, depending on how many kids we have, and they would leave their code for the next group, and they would go over, basically the groups would switch spots, and Blaine would be reading a code trying to build a reindeer or a dog, and his team would be coming over to build their robot or their Santa Claus using this code. You can see that Blaine added an extra line of code. His last line says,
do victory dance.
Do victory dance. And so I didn't see that part of the program, but I guess that's for the 3D printer to interpret. So that is essentially how the 3D print activity works. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to call me or get a hold of me. Like I said, our blocks will be smaller than these blocks. But I don't think that our 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders will have any issues manipulating smaller blocks. It just means that our grid paper will have to be a little bit smaller so that each block fits within a grid. I hope that helps. Again, don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. Blaine, you have any thing to say about the activity?
Nope. Just that 3D printer is not working well.